Well, that was a very joyful Shechianu moment, just everybody mingling like that. Thanks for all the wonderful, wonderful energy. As our Torah portion begins, we learn that the people in the world have misbehaved so badly that God wants to destroy the world. Last week, God created the world, and now already a week later, God decides it's time to destroy the world. What could possibly have happened? It's a little unclear exactly what the people have done, that there's been some sort of corruption, wrongdoing. A lot of commentators have a lot of different interpretations for what they could have done. Greed, oppression, robbery, undermining the basic human dignity of each other. As I was thinking about Noah and the corruption of the world and people treating each other poorly, and yesterday being the 4th anniversary of the shooting in Pittsburgh, the shooting in the Pittsburgh synagogue that left 11 Jews dead, the deadliest mass shooting in our Jewish community here in this country. 11 Jews killed by a man who was convinced that caravans of immigrants funded by George Soros and supported by Jews were making their way to the U.S. An anti-Semitic canard about Jewish control, and it left 11 Jews dead. I think many of us remember where we were when we heard about this tragedy. I was just coming out of services here when Butch told me on Saturday morning. And by that afternoon, my voicemail and my email was filled with my interfaith partners expressing their condolences and their dismay. And by Saturday night, I had a service ready to go because so many people wanted to come and be with us together here in the sanctuary and express their horror and their shock at this terrible, terrible anti-Semitic incident. Over these last few weeks, anti-Semitism has continued to be in the news. I think all of us are very well aware of Kanye West, now known as Ye, his interview with Tucker Carlson on Fox News in which he spewed anti-Semitic venom. And then we found out later that what was actually aired on Fox News was milder than some of what he had said, that they pulled out only certain clips. And later on, when we heard the whole thing, it was even worse than what was aired on Fox News. It didn't take very long. Unfortunately, Adidas ended their partnership with him. They're going to lose a lot of money as well as him. And there's a documentary that was made about Ye that will not be aired. We're glad when we see this happening, when people see these anti-Semitic incidents and they respond swiftly and appropriately. But we also know that there are other incidents of anti-Semitism that are not being addressed in that kind of manner. Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn who look Jewish because of their garb are getting beat up, and it doesn't get a lot of attention, the kind of harassment that they receive. Anti-Semitism has been rising in this country. And yet, we're also struggling to define exactly what anti-Semitism is. When is it anti-Semitism and when is it not anti-Semitism? When is it saying something that is discrimination against Jewish people? And when is what people are saying legitimate criticism of the state of Israel? When is it that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and when is it not? It's not always that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It's not always that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, and we need to learn to distinguish so that we can address this appropriately. So when is anti-Zionism not anti-Semitic? Some people in the world are anti-Zionist because they define Zionism very differently than we do. That if you define Zionism as the right of the Jewish people to have a state in the land of Israel, then to be anti-Zionist against that may be depriving the Jews of their rights to that state. But there are many people in the world who don't see Zionism in that vein. Some of them who actually live in the West Bank, Palestinians, but others too who support the Palestinian cause, where they see that Zionism is privileging Jewish rights over non-Jewish rights. And so that is a kind of anti-Zionism that's not anti-Semitic. That there are people who believe that Palestinians and Jews should have equal rights, and that's not, on its face, anti-Semitic. There's some people who believe that Israel should be a state for all its citizens and not be a Jewish state. We can debate that, but on the face of it, it's not anti-Semitic. And when we criticize the policies of the state of Israel, that's also not anti-Semitic, just like we can criticize the policies of the United States or Venezuela or Hungary or any other place around the world. And even boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS, is not on its face anti-Semitic. We might not agree with the boycotts, but having the right to boycott another country or its policies is something that people do all the time. But when does anti-Zionism become anti-Semitic? Because it does sometimes. When Zionists are listed in the same category as white supremacists and Nazis, this is anti-Semitic. Not allowing Jewish groups that have Zionist sentiments to be part of progressive spaces, this is anti-Semitic, and it's happening on campuses. The nefarious belief in worldwide Jewish conspiracy, globalists, elitists who manipulate events, this is anti-Semitism. When people talk about George Soros because he has a lot of money, that he's manipulating the world, this is anti-Semitic. When people talk about the Rothschilds, anti-Semitism. The Pittsburgh shooter, he was anti-Semitic, influenced by anti-Semitic canards, as I've already talked about. And on the left, we also see this anti-Semitism, that if every dirty, treacherous thing that's happening in the world is associated with Israel, anti-Semitic. There's some people who blame Israel for the police departments in the United States that use violence against unarmed people of color, because some of these police departments are receiving training from Israel on counterterrorism. You know what, folks? Violence against black people existed well before these trainings. That's anti-Semitism to claim that. Denying that Jews have any historical connection to the land of Israel, anti-Semitism. Assuming that the Israeli government speaks for all Jews or that Jews are responsible for the actions of Israel, anti-Semitic. And so we need to make these distinctions and to be wary and to call out anti-Semitism when we see it. I'm glad that Yi was called out. He's a powerful person. But I'm also disappointed to see that other powerful people aren't always held accountable. There's an article in the Washington Post called, "Congrats, you canceled Kanye. Call me when white guys get in trouble." Written by a woman, Karen Attiya. And she gives examples in which there are other people who get away with their anti-Semitism. Mel Gibson, excommunicated from Hollywood for his rabid anti-Semitism only for a few years. And then he was welcomed back into the industry, starring and directing now in his 5th Lethal Weapon movie. And what about Tucker Carlson and Fox News? And Donald Trump, who are trafficking in hate and anti-Semitic dog whistles all the time. Sure, mainstream advertisers have dropped Tucker Carlson's show, but Tucker Carlson still commands attention, wealth, and power to pollute public discourse with xenophobia, racism, and anti-Semitic dog whistles. And frankly, I believe that Tucker Carlson exploited Yi by inviting him on his Fox News show and then just showing some of the clips that were dog whistles as opposed to really out-and-out anti-Semitism, but knowing full well that other people were going to find those videos and see that Yi was really anti-Semitic. Tucker Carlson knew that. He used him to be his mouthpiece. It really is quite disgusting. It's important that we ensure that bigotry is called out in all of its forms, because it's all connected, too. Hannah Rosenthal, who was Obama's anti-Semitism envoy, came to speak at Beth Emmet a number of years ago. And somebody asked her during that speech about the ADL's study that showed that anti-Semitism is on the rise. The fact that anti-Semitism is on the rise in 2022 is really not new. It's been going on for 10 years now. What do we do about that? And Hannah Rosenthal, who was an international anti-Semitic envoy, said, the ADL is right that anti-Semitism is on the rise, but there is one problem. We need to contextualize. Anti-Semitism is on the rise because hate is on the rise. It's not just anti-Semitism. It's racism. It's xenophobia. It's bigotry in all of its forms. They're all on the rise, and anti-Semitism is a part of it. And when we fight against bigotry of any kind, we are also fighting against anti-Semitism. And when we build coalitions with people who are also struggling because of racism, they fight with us against anti-Semitism. If you want to know who the biggest ally in Evanston, Illinois is fighting anti-Semitism, it's Pastor Michael Neighbors. If you don't follow his Facebook page, you should. Who's the first person to call out Ye for his anti-Semitism this week? Pastor Michael Neighbors. And he's almost always the first person to do so. He stands with the Jewish community, as he was one of the very first people to call me 4 years ago after the murders in Pittsburgh, because he knows that we also stand with him against racism. And he also knows that all of this is connected to white supremacy and that we need to fight bigotry in all of its forms. Anti-Semitism can't just be focused on in a vacuum. It's all connected. As Hannah Rosenthal taught, hate is on the rise. The shooter in Pittsburgh was spewing that hate against us, and other people will spew hate against other groups. And we need to band together to fight hate in all of its forms if we're going to get rid of anti-Semitism. After the flood in this week's Torah portion, only Noah and his family are alive. And then they begin to propagate, and the world gets to start again. And we might think, this is wonderful, a new beginning. And now that the world has started again, all of that corruption and treating each other with lack of dignity, that must be gone because people have learned their lesson. But guess what? They decide together that they're going to build the Tower of Babel. Now, one might think, well, they're working together. Together, all of these people are trying to build something. Maybe they have learned their lesson, that they need to treat each other with dignity and respect. But the Torah says no, that the reason that they want to build this tower is that they want to reach God. It's because of their hubris. As they say in the text, let us make a name for ourselves. They're not doing this because they are respectful of each other. It's because they want to be on the same level as God. There's a midrash that says, in order to build the Tower of Babel, the people treated each other with disdain. They had this goal of building the tower. It was not about cooperating. It was not about dignity or respect. It was not about lack of corruption. No. They built this tower because of their own ego needs, because of their desire to reach God. And so even though they were doing a project together, people were not treated well. God, when he saw the people creating this tower, crashed the tower to the ground and said, you no longer can all speak the same language. This is an ideological story, a story that teaches us that languages were created because of this moment, Babel, that's what it means. They couldn't understand each other anymore. Well, why would that be the punishment, one might ask? Here they were building something together, and yes, they weren't doing it for the right reason, but now, how are they possibly ever going to understand each other when they don't even speak the same language? Why would this be the punishment? It's even harder to work together if you don't speak the same language. Well, this is what I think. What I think is that when we are different from each other, we can't make assumptions. We have to listen carefully. We have to spend time getting to know each other. There's effort involved. That we need to develop respect and understanding. And so God makes it impossible for us just so easily to think we understand each other. I also think that what God is saying is that when we think maybe we could get rid of all the hate in the world if we were all the same, if we were all white, if we were all Latinx, if we were all black, if we were all Jews, if we were all the same, whatever the same would be, that somehow hate would go away in the world. And the Tower of Babel belies that truth. It says, no, when we were all the same, we treat each other badly. But perhaps with all of us being different, and all of us having to make an effort to listen carefully, to get to know each other, that instead we could develop respect in our differences. This is our hope, and this is our goal. In a world in which we see hate on the rise, including hatred of our own, and the fear that all of us feel. Maybe not walking around the street, because when we walk out into the street, we don't look that much different than anybody else. But when we walk into this building and thinking about, do we have the proper security? To think that 11 people were murdered while at Shabbat prayer 4 years ago, just horrific. And yet that murder didn't take place in a vacuum. It took place because people were spewing hate, and somebody listened and took up a gun and killed other people. We need to develop love and respect for each other in our differences. This is what God wants, and this is what God expects. And how hard it is to do it when sometimes we feel that we are the ones who are targeted. But we need to work together with all those who are targeted and all those who are not to say this is the value of how we want to live, to work against racism, to work against anti-immigrant bias, to work against anti-Semitism in all its forms. Can we do this together? I think we can. But we only can if we join our hands and our hearts with our allies and we work to eradicate hate together. This is our calling, this is our mission, and this is our sacred task. Amen.